We have a pretty exciting session. It's all about service provider and the edge. And if you heard the sessions this morning, and some of you were in the executive summit that Raghu had yesterday, that of course, the importance of what's happening with energy. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But in general, we're going to talk about how computing is moving outside of the private and public data centers into what's going on at the edge. And the edge is everything that's in between endpoints and what's running in those private and public data centers. And now I have the privilege of welcoming 3 distinguished guests onto the stage during the course of this conversation, and I'm sure you'll find it extremely illuminating to hear from them. So I'll try to keep my comments as short as possible so that you can hear all about exciting developments that are going to go on over there. So let's talk about first what's the backdrop of what's going on here, not just in the world, but also particularly in Europe. There's disruption and chaos that I don't need to remind you of, but I think this disruption and chaos actually gives rise to opportunity. And it's this opportunity that I think we would like to talk about. And I just want to talk about one aspect of this opportunity, which is that because of digitization that's happening, there's a tremendous amount of data that's being produced regardless of the industry that you're in. So whether you're in car manufacturing or whether you're in insurance or finance or whether you're running a network, there's a tremendous amount of data that's being produced. And right now, we are utilizing less than 1% in my unscientific back-of-the-envelope calculation of that data to make intelligent decisions. And so the next couple of decades or so, we're going to be using this tremendous amount of data to be able to make decisions, first just to see what's the relevance of the data, and then to make automated decisions based on it. And I think this opportunity we're trying to grapple with, and a lot of this collection of data and what's happening is really brought about because there is all this telemetry that's happening at the edge. And now, so first let me say, what is the edge? Because there's lots of definitions about what people could call the edge. For us, it's very straightforward. The edge is digital infrastructure that you would locate close to where endpoints are producing or consuming data. And it is to run workloads. And the workload could be anything from a 5G workload, it could be an enterprise workload, it could be something that you need to run network and security services. So that's what the edge is. Now, of course, the edge differs on whether it's a provider edge, an enterprise edge, a thick edge, a thin edge, a far edge, a near edge. And so here on this slide, what you see is that we've defined the far edge as being what's on the premises of an enterprise. The near edge is in between what's on the premises of the enterprise and what any centralized data center, whether it's a public or the private cloud. And of course, whenever we talk about the edge, we cannot do that without speaking about the network itself, because the edge is distributed, it's across a large number of locations, so you always need to talk about the network. And the network happens to be a network that's spread over a wide area, so therefore it's the wide area network. When you talk about wide area networking, the telco always needs to come in. So that really collapses what we're talking about into this very simple graphic. And there's, of course, the concept of the cloud. How do you use cloud computing technologies to set up what's happening inside the telco network as well as what's happening at the edge? And so you've heard terms of telco cloud, edge cloud. It really doesn't mean that you're running it in a hyperscaler. It means use of cloud computing technologies to run a telco network and use of cloud computing technologies to run networks that are running at the edge or the edge cloud. So this should set up the framework for what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time. So let me dive in and say that what we're doing at VMware, and this was about 1.5 years ago, we decided to centralize 3 different layers of the stack as far as the edge is concerned into one consistent business unit structure, and that's the business unit that I run. And so what we found out is that looking a little bit ahead, that 3 seemingly disparate areas are actually have a lot of commonality. So let me talk about what those are. At the bottom layer of this stack is the service provider network, and we're going to hear from one of the service providers today, Virgin Mobile O2. And this service provider network is really, think of it as a network that runs your 4G, your 5G, your fixed access. And this network, there's a core aspect of this network, which you see on the right-hand side of this picture. And then there's the radio access part of this network, or of course in the fixed network, it's not the radio part of it, but it's the fixed wireless part of it. So this network, what's happening right now, is that that network is going through a tremendous change. And that change is really about disaggregation. So there's disaggregation coming in, there's software that is coming in to replace hardware that is going in. And when that software is coming in, what the service providers are doing is modernizing the network. So a piece of our strategy at VMware is to help service providers modernize their networks. So we're going to hear about that today. Now you move to the next layer up in the stack, and there is the Secure Access Services Edge. So what does this mean? Secure Access Services Edge is just making software out of what used to be hardware-based appliances that are in the overlay. So this is to run network and security services that run on top of the actual physical network. So that's what's running on top of broadband, what's running on top of Ethernet, what's running on top of your 4G and 5G networks. And as everyone knows here in the audience, that software is all about creating another layer of abstraction. So what this Secure Access Service Edge does is create a layer of abstraction, provides intelligence that allows you to use the underlying network in a much more intelligent fashion than you would otherwise. And really there's two aspects to that SASE. One of it is SD-WAN, which is software-defined wide area networking, and the other is SSE, which is the Security Services Edge. So you combine those two things together and you get Secure Access Services Edge. So that's the overlay part. And the part on top where you see the word edge native applications, this is to run the workloads that are now appearing at the edge. So the fastest place where workloads are growing in an enterprise network is actually at the edge. So it's more than what's growing in the public cloud, it's more than what's growing in the private cloud, it's actually going on at the edge. So because workloads are growing fastest at the edge, that's why this need for the digital infrastructure that we find all the way to the edge from the private and the public cloud. So this is the taxonomy, this is the structure that we've set up within VMware. And what we're trying to get done is to come up with one consistent software stack or digital infrastructure to run all of these classes of workloads, whether it is for the 5G network, whether it is for SD-WAN and SSE, and whether it is for the edge native applications on top. One consistent digital infrastructure. We think that's actually going to be a massive benefit to customers, both our telecom operator customers, as well as end enterprises, and then in turn, everyone else out there, whether it's a consumer or an SMB. This consistency and one digital stack is going to be quite important. So let's start with the top layer, which is edge native applications and the edge compute stack. And what happens with this, and we'll hear about a specific example today, is that computing, and as I talked about intelligence through all this information that we're gathering, really empowers innovation. And the end goal is to make features faster for us, but then to make products faster that end customers can use out of all the companies that are out there that VMware works with. So I have a couple of slides here that I'm not going to walk through each parts of the stack, but the reason for me to show this is that we have a portfolio now that we call the VMware Edge Compute Stack portfolio. It's ECS in short. And what we're trying to get done here is at the edge itself to be able to support virtual machines and containers, and to do that in a consistent way regardless of the kind of infrastructure that is being used to run the edge. Now this is very different from running workloads in a public or a private cloud. Why is that? Because the number of locations are extremely large, and the kind of infrastructure that you have to run these workloads might be extremely small. And so it's really small amount of infrastructure in a very large numbers of locations, which is what this edge is about. So I used to, facetiously say that I should be able to stand up here and tell all of you, honey, I've shrunk the stack. Because, you cannot take the same stack that is being run in the private and public clouds and then expect it to run at the edge without shrinking. So it's shrinking specifically from a footprint standpoint. And while you're shrinking that, you should be able to increase the performance of the stack, because as you'll hear in this session, that performance is extremely important. The low latency that you get for workloads running at the edge is actually a critical requirement for what the edge compute stack is expected to do. So this is what we are constructing now. We've already announced the enterprise edge. There's a version 2.0 that got announced in San Francisco. On the network edge side, we're looking at running containers on the SD-WAN infrastructure. We are working on, but haven't launched yet, the device edge. And as you can see here, it's even meant for non-x86 devices, which 5 years ago at VMware would be heresy to say that we're actually going in a non-x86 way, and even at some point to go into bare metal. both for the radio access network as well as in cases for the enterprise. So I'm going to bring on stage now to discuss what's happening on edge compute with someone that I've known very recently, Dr. Henning Loser. I want to welcome you on stage, and so please come on and please give a big hand to.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So Dr. Henning runs P-Lab at Audi. And Audi, of course, being one of the world's leading car manufacturers, part of the Volkswagen Group, we're very fortunate to have him here, and I'm going to pepper him with some questions about what's happening overall in car manufacturing, and then you'll see the relevance to what's going on the edge compute portfolio side. So first of all, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So of course, we've heard that through the pandemic, all the supply chain challenges that have happened, and car manufacturers have had to deal with it. So how do you accommodate for this change, and what do you do looking forward in terms of car manufacturing as you deal with all these challenges through the pandemic and through the supply chain?
What we're doing, or what we're trying to do, is to get a transparency into our supply chain, see what's happening out there, and then be able to make decisions based on data on how to produce our cars. I mean, what's happening right now, and that's probably happening for every one of you, the disruptions in the supply chain are a serious thing, something we have to deal with, most of the time on short notice. Building a car, for me, there are thousands of parts that are built into a beautiful craftsmanship, but you have to get those parts into your plants or you can't do it.
Yes, well said. Now, what are consumers doing? Because sometimes now you have to wait almost half a year to get a car, right? And it used to not be that case. So what are consumers doing? How is consumer behavior changing in terms of car buying?
Well, our consumers, it depends on where you are at the world, but our consumers, unfortunately, they have to wait for cars. That's something we're not satisfied with. So we're working very hard on getting our cars out of the plants, getting the cars to you, to the consumers, and that's a struggle. We're working on it.
Okay. Now, I was very fortunate to visit one of the Audi factories not too long ago, where I met Dr. Henning and his colleagues. And it's amazing, as he was saying, what it takes to make one of these cars, as you see the production that is happening on the car line, and the supply chain problem. When the day that I went, one of the production lines, couldn't actually get started because there was a lack of parts, the supply chain problem. But car manufacturing is actually changing extremely rapidly. And we're at this point where digitization on the factory floor is becoming more and more a reality. And we were just chatting about that before the session started. And of course, Dr. Henning and others are looking to see this stuff about what we spoke about, which is workloads moving towards the edge. So I want to put you on the spot and ask you, how is car manufacturing actually changing? What is it that you are looking to do in P-Labs and at Audi as a part of Volkswagen Group?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sanjay. What we are doing now is that we're applying the technologies out of the data centers, and we're looking at how to apply these technologies to the automation world. So we've been used in automation to have compute driving our robots, driving our automation, and this compute was directly wired and tied to the automation cells. And what we're trying to do now is to think of this entire challenge, building a car differently, thinking of, well, what we actually want as production is just the features. We want the functionality. It requires compute, but that compute doesn't necessarily have to be right next or tied to your automation cell. And so what we're doing right now, together with your help, and we're very grateful for that, is to take out the compute we have in our production lines, centralize it on, well, what we call edge. So in your chart, it would be even below the telco cloud, because we need latencies that are below 8 milliseconds. If you want to drive the orchestration of a robot cell, 8 milliseconds is the cycle time you have. So we have to cut down on these latencies, and that's a big challenge. It's a challenge for the server side, it's a challenge for the network, and it's also a challenge for us because of all of the sudden we introduce new technologies and we have no clue how to handle them from a production side. But we know if something breaks there, the entire factory stops, and that's nothing we really want to experience.
Yeah. I think this aspect of low latency is extremely important because we're not going to get to the 8 milliseconds if you go from the factory floor all the way back to the cloud and back. Now this is one of the primary needs for running workloads very close to the edge. So thank you for that. And my last question is, with edge compute coming in from the OT side of the house, and there's of course the IT that also runs in organizations like yourselves, how is it that IT and OT are working together in order to achieve these goals of digitization on the factory floor?
Doing this can only be done jointly. There's just no way that us from production drive this alone. It's a joint effort. What we're doing right now, we're setting up a dedicated project team, so that we jointly with IT drive this technology to, we hope to be the first ones in automation to actually do this and show that this entire concept is doable. And it's always, if you try out something new that hasn't been there before, there's nobody to tell you how to do it. so we have to figure it out along the way, and that's what we're about to do.
Great. Thank you. Well, please give a hand to Dr. Henning for making the visit and for sharing some of his insights with us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. When I got back from the factory tour that I did, went home, and my son said, "Dad, where's the car? You went to Audi and they didn't give you a car?" I'm like, okay, let's move on from that into the next area of the stack that we're going to talk about, which is the overlay intelligence. So again, back to our slide. So we've touched upon what's happening with edge native applications. Dr. Henning told us about the need for low latency, why the workloads are moving to the edge, the challenge of bringing IT and OT together. And now what's happening at this overlay layer, which is where the network and security services are running, that there's a need for policy-based mechanisms to run these network and security services, insert security based on dynamic conditions. So just an example of this is, again, if you are in an enterprise and you have your users, which actually could be humans or it could be machines that need access to the network, some of that access needs to be privileged, better quality of service, some security services may need to be inserted, some not. So the decision-making of this policy-based mechanism, if you can get it done on the fly, then this achieves real-time behavior, both in terms of the runtime as well as in setting up the management and control systems that you need. And we, of course, from a VMware standpoint, have set up an infrastructure starting with our strength on an SD-WAN perspective, where you see users and devices on the one hand going to our SASE points of presence and then get access to all these applications. And the crux of getting this done was, of course, having this policy-based mechanism, having the intelligence and running things as a service. So we have about 18,000 customers right now using our SD-WAN technology to get this done. And the new innovation that we're announcing at this event, of course, is the SD-WAN client. Now what this means is, previously, in order for you to get access to the applications, you had a hardware edge device, and that hardware edge device collated all of the traffic before you got access to those applications. That hardware edge device was used in branch offices, in places like oil rigs, even in cars. I mean, in Sussex, there's a car that has been outfitted with, or several cars that have been outfitted with the SD-WAN hardware devices. But the innovation is now to extend that into software. And so clients, which means a piece of software that runs on a laptop or a mobile phone, could be a first-class citizen of an SD-WAN network. And we think that this is a major change. We're the first ones to announce an SD-WAN client. And this combines with the security of zero trust, so that you could really have any endpoint in your network now, also endpoints in partner locations that could get access to the resources that they need. So we think this is significant. We acquired a company by the name of Ananda, A-N-A-N-D-A, and if you go to www.ananda.net, you'll find up there on the website that they are now part of VMware. And so we're integrating that into our SD-WAN business, and very pleased that, that this is going to take the next step forward in the evolution of what's happening with SD-WAN. Okay, so if you look at what we've done so far from a hardware edge deployment, we have 600,000 or plus edges already deployed across the world. And this allows us to really have a real sense of what's happening with networking all the way out into where the users and the endpoints are. Now you can see this a few years down the road. This would be augmented with software clients, and we expect the number to be several times larger than this. Now all of this runs on a set of points of presence that are sprinkled all across the globe. And what we do on a continual basis is add to those points of presence depending on where the customer demand is. And so these are our new points of presence that we've rolled out and are continuing to roll out so that we can get access to enterprises or provide access to enterprises regardless of where they are. So you can see that, you know, when we started off building this network, we were the first ones to say that this required, you know, points of presence that would locate networking and security services rather than running them only on-prem. So we think that this expansion along with the SD-WAN client is actually very significant for us as we continue to provide this kind of distributed access architecture to all of our customers out there. Now, it gives me great pleasure to welcome on stage Norbert Shar, who is the lead enterprise. Thank you, Norbert. So Norbert and I know each other for a number of years. Norbert is the lead enterprise architect at Allianz Technology Group. And of course, we're going to hear from Norbert about how he's deployed these technologies in his own network. So firstly, thank you very much for coming and being a part of this session and for being part of VMware Explore. So let me start off by asking you, what's your remit? What's your scope and responsibility as the lead enterprise architect at Allianz Technology Group?
Right, thanks Sanjay. So, I mean, Allianz Technology is, just as the name says, the IT part of Allianz Group. Allianz Group is one of the largest insurance companies of this world. And of course, our duty is more or less to provide the infrastructure and platform and application services to Allianz business globally. In about 80 countries, we have 60 operating entities that are distributed across a couple of hundreds of legal entities in this 80 countries. So this is more or less the scope that we need to interconnect properly. So in terms of connectivity to the on-premise data centers, to public cloud, to or between the offices itself, and of course also enable a secure and proper access of the end users to the applications. This is what I do, more or less, since a couple of years, also with the help of VMware. Yeah, so just incorporating the solutions of the company into our network infrastructure architecture. And in the meantime, we created something which more or less, I mean, you did show this overview with the 3 layers, which more or less looks pretty similar to that. So we call it ACEnet, which stands for Allianz Cloud and Edge Network.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Now, why did Allianz decide to deploy SD-WAN? What were you hoping to achieve with that?
Right. That's a good question. Because, of course, originally Allianz had, like many enterprises of this world, a solid, well-working MPLS backbone, so where all the offices have been connected to. And technically, it was working. Of course, we had our issues with this, but originally, the main driver where the whole journey starts with was commercial optimization. So really try to reduce the costs we have more or less to charge our customers for. Then secondly, important was also time to market, to be flexible, faster in order to deliver our connectivity to the offices and the business units. Thirdly, Very important as well, user experience. This is not to forget. So, I mean, even an insurance agent might not be someone who needs an 8 milliseconds latency to be delivered, but it requires at least a stable connection. In some of our locations, we even run call centers 24/7. That means the customer need to be able to reach the call center agent all the time. Yeah, and last but not least, not to forget security. Security was, of course, another motivation why we decided for SD-WAN.
Right. And how has the project gone? What has been your experience with the deployment of SD-WAN?
Well, a single sentence would answer this question. It was a big success. So for Allianz, probably to a surprise to many people, yeah, because I mean, network is not that famous, yeah, to be very stable and provide connectivity to low costs. We changed this completely. So we could start optimizing the underlay connectivity as first step, yeah, with the help of SD-WAN, because the overlay now more or less abstracts the WAN connectivity from the underlay itself. And this helped a lot to achieve the first goal, to optimize the commercials. Yeah. Second goal is also related to this, yeah, because the new underlay helps us also to become more flexible, faster. I mean, it's easier to deliver to broadband or DSL connections to an office than to order an MPLS connection, which in the past took us a couple of months to deliver. So this is definitely something we could also have achieved. And the third area is maybe the largest area, the user experience. Yeah, because in this area falls on one hand side the policy, let's say, capabilities in the product itself. So you can, depending on the type of traffic, on the policy definitions, you can steer and control the traffic accordingly. And it's helped a lot to optimize also the connectivity into the cloud, into the data centers, and further down the road. But of course, we are not at the final goal. Already there's still a lot to do. And the last piece was, like I mentioned, security. And security is something, on one hand side, comes together with the segmentation capabilities in SD-WAN. So we created, for example, 3 major overlay networks in our 3 regions in Allianz globally. But we could also, let's say, create smaller connected segments on the office branch itself, and keep this segmentation also in the WAN all the way down to the CNCs, our central peering location. We call it CNC, the edges. But what I wanted to highlight today is a security feature that is probably considered as given, and this is the encryption. Yeah. I mean, if you think back a couple of years when we had all this Snowden affairs, yeah, so let's say the fact that it became obvious that some services in this world are just let's say wiretapping traffic, and by the way, not just internet traffic. They do this on subsea cables. And I mean, guess what? In the subsea cables, also your MPLS connections are carried over. Yeah? So this is a matter of fact, and this means those services are able to capture and wiretap this traffic as well. And SD-WAN changed this completely. Yeah. So here we have a fully encrypted end-to-end network connection under our control. And this is, let's say, the last piece we could also have achieved.
That's a very, very important point. Of course, cybersecurity, as Raghu also was talking about, one of the top 3 challenges for almost all enterprises out there. So now that you've rolled out SD-WAN to your branch offices, what do you see as the platform can help you going forward?
Right. Like I said before, we are not at, let's say, the final goal. Probably the final goal doesn't exist anyway in these times. Yeah. So, like you said, it's quite disruptive. So, permanent change is present. For us, this means we are leveraging the new flexibility we could have achieved, supporting our business, being faster in deploying connectivity to new sites. In particular, in our sales force, this is super important because we have 155,000 employees, but 200,000 sales force people selling our products, supporting our customers. So for them, it was also a complete game changer, and this is something we can, in future, further optimize. Move away completely from MPLS as a network transport, build on top of internet connectivity, add additional internet access products or solutions like 4G, 5G, or Starlink even. Yeah? So satellite uplinks is something that is now in reach also, and you can imagine this is super fast. Yeah? So also the underlay connectivity. And last but not least, what is for us also super interesting and probably a compelling opportunity is the software SD-WAN piece you have presented. Because for us, it extends the capabilities or the flexible way to deliver an overlay network down to the very client, the very laptop or desktop computer, or even a server in the public data center or in a private data center, and still be able to control the traffic according to our policies.
That's great. Well, please join me in thanking Norbert. Thank you very much for... That was great to hear from one of the leading companies out there in the enterprise space. So let's move to the next layer of the stack now, which is actually the underlay, which is the network itself. And here what we're doing, of course, is constructing a telco cloud. So this is helping telecom operators construct and modernize their network using computing technologies. And we believe that getting that done accelerates opportunities at the edge, not just for the telecom operator, but of course, from them to the enterprise as well as to the consumer. And we have, three areas that we're looking at. One is modernizing the network, but as I pointed out in the beginning, what's happening in these networks is disaggregation, where previously, especially in the radio access network, you could go to one provider to get a monolithic hardware and software combined. That is getting disaggregated. The disaggregation drives innovation. It allows much faster service velocity. It also brings a challenge. The disaggregation means how do you put these things to run together? And to solve that, you need more automation. So we have a focus around automation. We have a focus around service assurance in the products that we're building at VMware to both allow this disaggregation to happen, but then also to get the automation to be done so that you can still have a system that works together. The last piece of this is, of course, the promise of programmability, because for us, people who have started on the networking side, network on demand has always been the holy grail. It's not there yet, but we believe that programmability of the network, which the promise that 5G and slicing will bring, is something where an application declares its intent dynamically and then the network responds to provide that slice of the network for a particular portion of time. So these three aspects is what's important, and I'll just briefly touch upon the innovation that we are working on at VMware. So you see at the lower part of this picture that we have 275, actually it's over 300 now, certified virtual network functions that run on our stack. So this is from the common network equipment providers that you would expect. We work together with them, whether it's a Nokia or an Ericsson or Samsung, Huawei, and Mavenir for the most part. Of course, there's a move away from a macroeconomic situation, away from Huawei into these other providers, and we are part of that. Bare metal automation, you would not hear bare metal as being something that VMware would have driven 10 years ago, but we believe that there's a need for much lower ends of the infrastructure to support bare metal as well. So to have automation running across bare metal is again one of the focuses in the group that we have at VMware. And then a couple of other areas. As you saw probably in the discussion that Kit was referring to earlier today, that we have a layer of abstraction called the RIC, or the RAN Intelligent Controller, and there are the opportunities to do things like spectral efficiency while running on top of that layer. So these are all programmability, modernization, disaggregation aspects of what's happening in the network that we focus on at VMware so that we can help service providers out there. Last piece I wanted to mention before I bring on our next guest onto the stage is the work that we're doing in private mobile networking. So there are areas, especially where there's large locations, whether it's an airport or a stadium or an agricultural field, where you require much better connectivity that is provided by today's wireless connectivity. And so what we're doing is coming up with a private mobile networking solution in conjunction with our service provider partners, so that there is one additional underlay that people can use, that enterprises can use to run their networks. And then we have the intelligence layer on top that chooses the right underlay depending on what the application is at that instant of time. So this is another area that we think is going to be quite fruitful. It is still somewhat at the early stages of getting done, but we think that both enterprises as well as service providers are moving in this direction. It gives you one additional type of underlay that has certain characteristics that could be very helpful. So what I want to do next is bring on Alex Boyd onto the stage, and Alex is the head of Telco Cloud for Virgin Mobile O2. Alex. So Virgin Mobile O2 is a fantastic example of how service providers are modernizing their networks using technology to get that done. So I'd like to ask you, Alex, firstly, thank you for coming. No problem. And secondly, I want to ask, how are you using computing technologies to modernize your network, starting with the core?
So in core transformation, it all starts with consistency and commitment, I think. So we founded a dedicated program to drive the transformation we wanted. We stood up an automation framework to underpin everything that we do. And now we've standardized on a horizontal platform from yourselves, across the piece. So that makes that very much easier, but it's all about that second step we want to take. Is not just about bringing us new technology and new stacks. That doesn't transform us. We've got to take that actual journey to get where we want to go. We created this framework to give us the changes across the business that, into 5G, B2B, network as a service, all these new areas, TV, which is new for me, certainly, but it's certainly becoming on my radar.
Great. Now, many of you may not know the extent of Virgin Mobile O2 network, but you have 50 million connections that are out there. You pass approximately 16 million fixed endpoints. So, and you have a large number of small sites in London. Can you say a few more words about the extent of the O2 network and then how you're moving the modernization from the core into the RAN?
Absolutely, yeah. In the last year, we've built 8 new production sites just to underpin all of that. They're what we call the telco cloud sites. And along the way, we need to flex with our partners to help us in that space to get that transformation. But like I say, pivoting back to the automation framework piece, that's where we drive that knowledge back into the company as a business. So we work with our standards and bring our partners in to work within those standards, and that helps us push out towards any site, so we can take a new edge site on from that perspective. We put the customer sort of at the heart of everything we want to do. So my customer is somebody internal that runs an application. So I'm the infrastructure provider for them, but they touch the end customer out into the worldwide. So that's how we. I have to look at that and make sure that the team and the infrastructure, we put the infrastructure in their hands consistently, if that makes sense. Whether that's on-premise, in the cloud, out at the edge, it's all about that consistency of execution.
Yeah, I think very well said, because the consistency of the compute infrastructure, if it's 3 different types of infrastructure, 3 different automation mechanisms, 3 different service assurance mechanisms, it doesn't work. But having the consistency absolutely helps. So with this automation, service assurance that you're putting in, with the digitization, what do you expect in terms of new services that Virgin Mobile O2 is going to be rolling out?
Well, yeah, as you say, having that consistency in the horizontal platforms means we can ramp up the risks that we take as a business. RAN and edge, it's not new for us, that edge play. We've been putting devices out on masts for a long time, but it is certainly different in the scope of those services that are going to be out there. I keep mentioning the automation framework. It's going to be key to that consistent delivery model and platform that we put out there. We're trying to absorb as much as we can from the industry, so what we see other people doing, so kind of like opening ourselves up rather than being closed off and doing it ourselves. Let's look at what the industry is doing and leverage that as well. And so whilst we bring all that to life in our technology stack, as a business, we're still having to roll out 5G, undertaking our largest fiber rollout, launching IPTV services. Network as a service, as you mentioned, is something that is very much on the radar for us to get done. So that you'll see that sort of innovation coming through, regardless of the access method or where it connects to the network.
Right. Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks, Alex. Thank you for coming. All right, so we've heard from all three layers of the stack now, starting with what was happening at the edge compute layer, and then moving on to what's going on with service, with the SASE layer, secure access service edge, and now down in the underlay, as Alex was talking about modernization and putting in automation to make sure that the networks are running well. So let's look at now, just spend a couple of minutes on when we pull these things together. I'm not going to walk through every, don't worry, I'm not going to walk through every box on this slide, but just to see how this all fits together from the perspective of how we're driving software to be able to automate these networks, regardless of whether we're talking about, the underlay, whether the overlay or the edge compute layer. So you see on one end, we have a telco cloud platform that runs the telco core. This is an example of what Alex is deploying, or you put in the near edge where you have SASE services. This is an example of what Allianz is deploying. And of course, in the future, edge compute services also running from the near edges or the points of presence. Then you move into the RAN architecture. We didn't actually spend a lot of time in looking at what's happening with ORAN, but on a step to ORAN is virtualized RAN, or the vRAN, and there's a lot of customers that are looking at that right now. And then moving all the way onto the premises or the far edge is what we're doing with both running, of course, the network and security services, but also compute running on top. So this is how it all ties together, and we are driving, of course, for a consistent way to do the management and control plane, regardless of where these workloads are. Okay, let's change gears slightly, and now we're in Europe. Of course, there's a crisis going on. There's an energy crisis, and this is just something that Reuters, I was returning from one of my European trips recently, and I found that, there's, of course, a great amount of interest in what's happening in energy consumption and the shortage that is happening today. And as we're sitting in Barcelona, we might be a little away from where the center of the action, unfortunately, is north of us, but it's going to drive a reduction in terms of the services that both enterprise and consumers are going to get. So this is something that we all have to be aware of. Now, we, from a VMware perspective, have a role to play here, and I just want to make sure that we, all of us together realize that information, ICT, and this is Kit Colbert covered this today, that ICT use of energy is going up 211% in the time period that you see here. So this is a massive increase. And while it might be, from an overall energy consumption standpoint, compared to things like heating and all that, it might be small, the growth rate is tremendously large. And we have a combined responsibility to see how we can reduce this. And we think that outside of the public and the private data centers, which is where VMware works well in terms of virtualization, make good use of workloads running on the same hardware, improve hardware efficiency, the two other places where this is acutely needed, one is in the network. So you find actually that within ICT, it's the network that is consuming the most amount of energy going forward. So there's a focus that we have around this. We want to work with people out there. I'm going to show you a few of the customers that we are continuing to share some of our ideas with. But the other areas on the factory floor itself. So networking and factory floors is one of the top areas where energy is getting consumed, where IT and virtualization and the things that we're doing in terms of our compute stacks can actually help. So when you look at this, starting with the public cloud, here we have Ireland Utility, ESP, that has made some major effort to kind of reduce the energy consumption. Moving on to the private cloud, we have, through our virtualization technologies, been able to save 2.5 billion megawatt hours just based on virtualization. And then looking at what's happening, of course, much closer to what we are engaged with in our business, which is in telco networks. So telco networks, there was an example that I had spoken about yesterday, which is about spectral efficiency. So, when you put in this new layer of software abstraction, you can actually have startups come in and innovate in small aspects of what can get done inside the network. So we have a company called Cohere that we are working with, and Cohere has been tested by some of the operators that you see out there, where you can get a doubling of performance, but at the same time have a 50% reduction in energy usage. And then even out there onto the home, when you have set-top boxes or other devices that are terminating network connections, they're typically on all of the time. But what if they were not? What if we have some intelligent way to turn them on and off based on the amount of traffic that is happening, put them in sleep mode when they're not being used? And then on the enterprise edge, Audi themselves has saved, as you can see, 37,300 megawatt hours have been saved just in 2021 through their conservation efforts. So this is something that we think, there's obviously a here and now, but this is not a problem that's going to go away. And we think that intelligence, computing technology, and software are going to help the entire world look at energy consumption in the in the ICT space and reduce that envelope, for all of us going forward. So I just wanted to make sure that we are all contributors to this. We are all consumers of energy, and we think that this is something that, while it might start in Europe, it's definitely going to impact the rest of the world as well. Now, just a few data points. There's two ways to look at this. One is, of course, the power saving aspect. Virtualization saves energy. We have, there's an RAP that we are constructing. RAP, again, is something that we use in the RAN space. I talked about the spectral efficiency benefit through deep cooling, through compute lifecycle, turning things on and off. These are all aspects that we're doing in terms of saving power. But of course, there's a carbon reduction aspect as well. As we speak right now, there is the COP27 event happening in Egypt. And many of the leaders of state are there trying to come up with yet another way to look at how we can reduce emissions, so that together, again, we have only one planet to share. Together we can look at how we can have lesser emissions and reduce the amount of warming of the climate. And so again, virtualization, automation, intelligently placing workloads where they are required all contribute on the ICT part of it. Of course, there's a massive non-ICT part as well, but ICT has a significant role to play here. So regardless of whether we're talking about factory floor or a cell site, or we're looking at automation in terms of what insurance companies and all that are doing, all of this is a contributor. So I didn't want to end with a very somber note, but I think this is really critically important for all of us to understand that this is a situation that, while Europe may be experiencing it today, the rest of the world could also be experiencing it not too far in the distant future. So with that, from a positive aspect, I think all of you are now graduates of the VMware Edge Explorer session, and so you have a badge that you can proudly wear, as I'm doing right now, and or distribute out to your pets or kids or whatever when you get back. But thank you very much for attending. I think this has been tremendous. I want to first thank our three guests that came up here, so thank you very much. Norbert.